All right, we're going to kick things off right on time here at 11. Welcome to Product Manager Superpowers, Trello, Confluence, and Jira. I'm Corinne. I'm on the product marketing team for Jira. I've been working with your presenter, Phil, over the last couple of months on this presentation. It's going to be awesome. You're going to learn a lot. But just to kick things off for Phil, I'm going to tell you a couple facts about him that you most definitely didn't know. He was born in Tokyo, Japan. He was delivered by an emperor's doctor, the only second Western baby to do so. And he became a tourist attraction in the hospital due to being the only giant gaijin baby. So I'm doing these fun facts with all my speakers. I think this is the best one. So if nothing else, you get the fun fact. All right, Phil, take it away.
Cool. All right. Thanks, Corinne, for that. Yeah, so like Corinne said, I'm Phil Oy. I'm a product manager at Atlassian. And I'm here to talk about product manager superpowers. So Trello, Jira, and Confluence. Now, before we get into the superpowers, it's probably worth talking about the superhero. And who's the superhero in this story? Batman, obviously. I like Batman because he's just a guy. He's got cool tools, right? Wasn't born on another planet. Wasn't bitten by a radioactive spider. He just has the cool tools and gadgets. So I like to think that that's us as a PM. We all can be Batman. So the PM is the superhero. What does that mean? Is that professional meeting goer? Definitely true. Product owner, but we earlier talking about product manager. So what's the product manager? So I like this very simple definition. Product manager is responsible for defining the why, the when, and the what to build. So it's as good as any for the purpose of this talk. So what do? Well, they do a lot. So a PM's life is pretty hard. We juggle lots of responsibilities. But putting it another way, we do whatever is not being done by the rest of the team. So if you don't have an interaction designer, guess what? You're creating wireframes. If you don't have a product marketer like Corinne, guess what? That's your job too. So let's get in to see how we can help this superhero. So what I'll talk about today is a bunch of very, very practical tips and tricks that you can use on Monday. This is it's not a recipe guide. You can mix and match them as you see fit. There's lots of different product managers in the world that do lots of different ways of doing product management. So use what works, leave the rest. And the last point I'll make is for Jira and Confluence, all these tricks equally apply to server or cloud. So you're covered there. So what I'm not going to talk about today is the mechanics of Agile and Scrum, Kanban, how to plan sprints, and those kinds of things. Awesome stuff there. That's another talk. That's not this one. And I'm also not going to talk about how to become a PM. So there's plenty to talk about there too, but that isn't this talk either. But I would say if you are looking to get into product management and you want a good intro, I recommend this book by Marty Kagan. It's called Inspired: How to Create Tech Products That Customers Love. So if you haven't read it, you should. If you're a PM, you probably should have read it already. But even if you have, you probably should read it again. I think this is the second edition, came out relatively recently. Definitely worthwhile. All right, so with that, let's do this. So when I thought about how to structure this talk, I was thinking, well, maybe we can look at some of these superpowers and think about them in terms of what Atlassian thinks makes a great PM. So within Atlassian, we talk about the 4 pillars of product management. And these are how we organize our work and how our growth profiles and our personal career advancement is centered around these 4 areas: leading and inspiring, product manager mastery, master of the craft, delivering outcomes, and being a great communicator. So we'll take each of these in turn and give you some superpowers. So the first one is leading and inspiring. So this is basically how do you inspire your team, creating a vision, and driving the strategy. So the first crisis that we're going to solve is falling in love with the problem. So really easy to talk about solutions. In fact, that's all anybody ever talks about. Customers never tell you their problems. They tell you, I want this, I want that. I need this feature now. But as product managers, we really need to love the problem, right? Spend most of your time on the problem and far less on the solution. So the tool here is creating a project poster. So one of the situation is that it's really hard to get everyone to agree on the problem. Everyone likes to jump to solution mode and wax and wane about which solutions to implement. And likewise, as a product manager, we talk to customers, we're doing competitor analysis, we're doing presentations to boards and CEOs, and all this stuff is scattered around. So if someone joins the team, you're like, okay, how do I introduce what we're doing here? Okay, go read this, go watch that, go watch that. So having a single point of reference is pretty awesome. So the superpower here is using Confluence, and specifically the project poster play. So it was mentioned earlier in the keynote that we have, Atlassian publishes the team playbook, which you can get atlassian.com/team-playbook, or you can just search team playbook Atlassian. And on that, you'll find the project poster play, which you can watch a video and learn a bit more about. Highly recommended. So what does it look like? Well, it's pretty simple. You start at the top. So you're making the goal of this to make a single point of reference for your project. So up front, you get some mechanics out of the way. Who's the owner of the project, who's on the team, and whether this project is active or shipped or inactive. And you think about where it fits within the strategy first. So there's a company strategy you're trying to work towards. So how does your project fit into the big picture? And then you get into the problem space, really the meat of this page. And you want to start with, why are we doing this? What's the problem statement? Right, what problem are you trying to solve? Is it a customer problem, engineering problem? And what is the impact? So it's very good, all well and good, there's problems, but is this a big, burning, acute problem? So focus on that. And then that leads right into, how are you going to measure success? How do you know that this project has won the day? So get that up front early, as opposed to after the fact and say, so did it work? Well, I don't know. We shipped it, so I guess it worked. And then early on, you can talk about what are the possible solutions. Broad strokes, big ideas. This is before you build anything. So that's the problem space, and this should be living document that you keep iterating and refining this. And then you get into validation, right? So how do we know, validating the problem? How do we know this problem exists? What data do you have about this? What insights? And then what are the gaps? What do we still need to learn? What do we need to know? What assumptions do we have? What risks do we need to deal with? So again, validating this problem. And then the last stage is getting ready to make it. So once you actually understand the problem and you validate that it exists, you barely get into what's this project going to deliver? What's the elevator pitch, right? What's the README? And I like this little addition that's not in the play, but I love focusing on adding this bit, which is, what are you not doing? What are the things that what part of the problem are we explicitly not going to solve? What solutions are we basically discarded? That is a problem, that's a good thing to do, but we're not going to do it in this project. And then you think about these three pillars, which is, why will a customer want this, right? So write the blog post. What's the marketing piece that would go out that you would describe the impact and value of this project? Visualize it. So at some point, you probably have some prototype or screens to help people understand, and then the scale and scope. What is going to be built? And the value of all this is now you have the single point of reference that really walks people through what's the problem, why does it exist, how big is it, how acute is it, and how are we going to solve it? So now you have the single, when people say, what are we doing, point them here. New person to the team, you can point them to this page. So some tips and tricks. It should be a living document. This is not a kickoff document. This is not a page that you put together once at the beginning and then call it a day. This should evolve over time as you do more research, uncover new questions, and refine your problem and your pitch. And this is something that the product manager may lead, but the whole team should be involved. And once again, just point out, I think it's really cool to highlight what you're not doing, what problems you're not solving, and what solutions are you not delivering. So that's the first one. And that gets into the second, product manager mastery, being a master of your craft. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is your ideas are probably wrong. So you should try a learning backlog. So we all know most startups fail. Most features actually don't deliver any of the value that they were hoped to do. So all these ideas we're, I guess, objectively bad, right? Except for the people in this room, we are brilliant. We definitely have good ideas only, or not. I've had some real stinkers in my career. But figuring this out after you ship is the worst possible time to learn that your idea sucks. So why can't we should really front load that, find out that your idea is bad in the beginning, abandon it and find a new idea so you can spend time on your winners. And everyone talks about MVPs, but most MVPs are neither minimal, nor are they viable, and they really shouldn't even be products because you've built far too much. So how are we going to solve this? What's the superpower here? Well, the superpower is you can use Trello or Jira to have a learning backlog, which is instead of a backlog of features, we're going to build this and then this and this, and we're going to fix this bug and that bug. And you actually think about, well, hang on, what are the hypotheses? What are the risks? What are the assumptions? Force rank those and test them, right? Progressively going through those, building what you need. Eventually, there's a product at the end, assuming it all goes through, or you cancel the whole thing. So you basically just create a Jira project or a Trello board and do what I call the build, measure, learn loop. So what does that look like? It looks like this. So the idea is you take your biggest risk, your biggest assumption, and something that you hope to be true in the world. I really hope people would pay for my product, would be a good one. And then you figure out what is the smallest possible thing to build that you can test or stress test that assumption or that risk, right? That might be research, so a survey you send out, it might be a landing page on a website, any number of things, but what's the smallest possible thing that you can validate that idea or that risk is any good? And then you put it out in the world, you measure it, get results, and then you incorporate those and then learn from them and then refine your assumptions, risks. And keep rinse, lather, repeat until at the end of this, you should be hammering down your unknowns to get to a thing that actually is valuable. So what does that look like? So in Jira, you can just create a simple, create a project that basically, rather than backlog in progress done, you think about guesses, risks, assumptions, have cards for those. You move them into these are the experiments we want to build or run, whether those are in the wild, what are your awaiting results, and then whether they were successful or failed. So at the end of this, you end up with hopefully a bunch of things that succeeded and probably a bunch of things that failed. But you can also do this in Trello. So Trello is super flexible. Just build your list and cards. So here's one. Again, hypotheses, fancy word for guess, and assumptions, and you kind of move through designing your experiment, waiting results, and you validate or abandon. So that's a learning backlog, and some tips and tricks here is one, be really honest with your risks. Basically, what do you hope to be true in the world? What do you really, if it was not true, your product would probably fail. Those are things that you should front load and really investigate. And you should force rank these, really top to bottom. What is the biggest thing that's going to impact the success of your product? And then do the smallest possible thing to address that. Find a way to test it. Paper prototypes, click tests, landing pages, interviews, any number of strategies that do not necessarily involve building a whole lot of software. In the end, you'll do that as you go through the build, measure, learn loop. You're eventually building real things, but in the early days, when you're validating, you should really focus on the smallest possible thing. If you want to learn more about this process, if you haven't read it, old book now, but highly recommend it, Lead Startup by Eric Ries, goes into a whole book about this topic. Okay, so you have customers, right? You probably should learn from them. So collect some feedback. So the situation here is often we're flying blind. It's really hard, something can be really hard to get insight from customers. Finding participants is hard. How do you know that they even use the feature that you're trying to understand? And if you're lucky enough to even have a support team, does your customer know that it exists? Do they talk to them? And can support even find you? So the superpower here is either using Jira Service Desk or Jira Software, and basically provide a way to collect feedback in product. So the first one in Jira Service Desk, you can create what's called a widget, and you can embed it directly into your app, ideally contextually located near the thing you want to learn about. And you can position it more as, what do you think? Collect feedback. It's not necessarily I'm logging a ticket because I need support. That's how Service Desk that's how it it's structured, but you can equally just use this as, hey, give us feedback. And then you end up, after it's on your site, you start getting things flowing in, and you can contact that customer, you can learn more, schedule a call, you even get SLAs if you want to do all that kind of stuff. You can just as easily do this in Jira software with the issue collector. You can create multiple of these, drop them anywhere on your site, highly contextual to your, and then they're just Jira tickets. You can map them to like maybe a feedback issue type, and then track them in your Jira software project. So this idea is, one, make sure it's contextual, so you get people actually using your feature. You can actually collect the feedback directly. You may get bug reports. That's going to happen, useful and valuable, but you can move it to Jira, Jira software project and then actually triage it as normal. But the key thing is do the research, actually follow through, contact your customers, label these tickets that come in and find all people that are using some aspect, and you can contact them and then learn. So with that, move on to the next one. So everyone wants a pony, right? So there's lots of, or a unicorn, as we learned yesterday from Sean. So you probably should track your feature requests. So feature requests come from many channels, including the feedback channel we just talked about. But how do you track them? So these non-roadmap items, like once they're in Jira and they're committed to, that's one thing. But how do you keep track of all the stuff you're still mulling over and you haven't committed to? And people keep asking for the same stuff. Where does it fit? So your superpower here is Trello. So create a simple Trello board and share it. So this is you can do it in multiple ways, but here's one where you basically make a public board. You provide some instructions over there on the left that basically say how this works. And then you create an inbox list, which are basically untriaged cards that drop in. I want a pony. And then at some point, at some cadence, you go in as a team, or maybe just you, and sift through them. That's a good idea. That's a high priority. We would if we want to get to that. It's a good idea. It's low priority. We're probably not going to get to it. Things you're working on, things you're committed to. Figure out what best works for you. But Trello is a nice way to do this. So some tips and tricks here. Include the instructions so that people understand how your stuff works. Make sure you have an inbox of these new items that are untriaged. You can look into adding, there's a voting power up in Trello where you can basically get people to vote on your feature request. Be wary. Software is not a popularity contest. Just because a bunch of people want ponies doesn't mean that you're going to build them. But you can encourage subscribing, right? So people can subscribe to an individual card, and they get notified when you say, move it into, we're working on it now. So that's some way to manage feature requests. So the third one is getting into delivering outcomes. So we're not about output, we're about outcomes, right? These are customer outcomes, these are business outcomes. So we need to, as product managers, figure out how to do this. So roadmaps is your bread and butter, right? That's a product manager. This is what we do, and there can only be one top priority, and most roadmaps aren't designed that way. So the situation, everyone asks, when it's going to ship? No one's aligned. Everyone wants different things. And you have 1,000 competing priorities. So what are you going to work on? Superpower here is Trello with a little dash of Confluence and Jira. So basically, there are Jira and Confluence power-ups for Trello that you can add, which I recommend. And here's it's as simple as it gets, right? Which is, here's the someday list. These are the things we want to get to. These are the things we're committed to, and these are the things that shipped. You can add an in-progress label, or you can make a little list for in-progress if you like. But the idea is that committed to, that someday maybe, these are ordered. First of all, there's no side-by-side, right? So a Gantt chart, you're like, yeah, you can cheat. You can put two things next to each other. Oh, but these are running in parallel. These are high-priority items. That's rubbish. Don't do that. Right? There's one thing that's number one, and that's at the top. And anytime you have a choice between two things to work on, start at the top, right? So the other thing that's not in here are dates. Now, we heard some this morning, dates are good. People want to know visibility, but when you put a date in here, that doesn't magically make it so. So I like to think about priorities rather than dates. These are the things we want to work on first, second, and third, right? So this is a super simple example. You can get more complicated. Trello is super flexible. ideas. These are the things we're reaching from requirements, estimating, candidates for the sprints, and you can get really, whatever you like. And there's tons of integrations and ways you can customize and trick out your roadmaps. So for me, I keep it really simple. These are our priorities in order, right? But one is cool is any of these cards, we have the Jira power-up, where basically you can link a Trello card to a Jira issue or an Epic or whatever, and then suddenly there's that two-way connection. You actually see that this issue is in progress. It shows up on the board. There'll be a little yellow badge when it goes into progress and turn green when it's done. Super handy to help that connection. So the roadmap can contain a bunch of things that don't even make it to Jira yet, and that's fine. But once they do make it to Jira and they get committed to and they start getting planned, then you can connect them up, and then anybody looking at your roadmap can drill in and connect to real progress. Likewise, there's a Confluence power-up, which would then let you link your Jira ticket your Trello card to the project poster that we built earlier, so that people understand what this thing is, or maybe specs or product requirement documents, whatever the case may be. But super powerful. And then when you're ready, you should share this aggressively. Trello is awesome, but most people aren't sifting through boards looking to see, what kind of, search roadmap, see what everybody's roadmap is. I mean, I do that. You should totally do that too. But on your team space in Confluence, go in the editor and embed your Trello roadmap indirectly into Confluence, so people who are looking at your team can find it. So, and another little trick is potentially the things that ship. Think about having a public Trello board which shows all the items that have actually shipped. So this is like your reverse roadmap. These are the things that you've actually committed and shipped. So this is Trello's public one. It's pretty cool. So again, some tips here. I just want to reemphasize: force rank everything. Like, don't put two things at number one. That's just cheating. Link your cards to Trello link your Trello cards to Jira and Confluence whenever you can. Aggressively share your roadmap, because everyone wants to know when they get their pony. Encourage subscribing, like I said, and share what you've shipped. If you want to learn more about roadmaps, there's a talk that Sharif, who's here, gave a couple years ago at Summit called The Art of Building a Roadmap. You can get it at this URL. He goes, an entire 40 minutes just on this topic, so obviously you can go real deep. Next big one is decisions. Products you think they're a bunch of code. They're actually just a collection of decisions, a whole lot of them. And the problem is a lot of these decisions are really hard. And delaying and deferring decision-making is an absolute killer to your product. And a lot of them is because we have one-way doors. So if you're not familiar with that concept, there's one-way doors and two-way doors. A two-way door is a decision that's completely reversible. Should we make the button red or green? Why argue about it? Just pick one, and then if it's wrong, you change it later. It's not a big deal. One-way doors, on the other hand, are not easily reversible. So once it's done, it's done. So there's if the impact of that decision is high, you really should make sure you know what you're talking about before you just do it. And this can lead to paralysis. And the other problem with decisions often is there's no record keeping, right? So someone joins a team, or even yourself, like 6 months later, like, why the hell do we do that again? What was I'm sure we thought about it, but why? So the superpower here is Confluence, specifically the DAISY play. So you can, again, get that on the team playbook. You can download a slightly tweaked version, or there's a built-in decision template in Confluence. And you can go to the team playbook, definitely recommended here, but I'll walk through it. So the decision, it's just a page in Confluence. Up front, it's basically you name your decision, where should we go for lunch? Impact of this decision is obviously high. But yeah, so you have the status of the decision, this is in progress, or it's decided, the impact, and then you get the people, right? So you talk about who, so the DAISY model has this idea of a driver of a decision, who's the approver of the decision, who are the contributors, and who's informed. So the driver may not be the decision maker. They're not empowered to decide, but they are empowered to make sure the decision gets made. The approver is the ultimate person that has the accountability about this decision, and they are the person who actually make the call. The contributors are everybody who is, as you would expect, contributing to the decision, right? So they're providing evidence or arguing or getting into a whiteboard room, whiteboard session. And then there are the informed, right? These are the people who, in theory, don't care about how the mechanic is made. They just need to know about it once it's done. I've never really found anybody without an opinion personally, but in theory, the people who are just downstream affected by this decision would be the people you would put here. But I find that they end up contributing anyway, which is great. And the one key one here is a due date. So, dates for roadmaps, I'm not a big believer in that, but due dates for decisions are awesome. Great forcing function to say this thing needs to be done by a certain time. And then once you've actually decided, you put the outcome here. But the meat of the page is this bit where you have the background of the decision, right? So somebody who is maybe not on the team or isn't as steeped in this particular issue needs to get all the relevant details to be able to weigh in and make their recommendation. So, research, whatever it is, analytics, include the data that you have. If you know something, or any feedback, any customer research, include that so people can understand the context of the decision, and then you lay out your options. There's probably always 3. No, that's not true. But you have a bunch of options, and you describe them, pros and cons, maybe effort, whatever the case may be. This is just a table, so you can add more rows. You figure it out. There's no wrong way to do this. But this is where you hash it out. And then you lay out, because during the course of the decision, this may happen over a number of days or even weeks, actions are come up. It's like, well, we actually need more data. We need to find out more. We need to do a technical spike or whatever it is to get more insight. And then you have this outcome once it's decided. And the big idea here is that you use Confluence with inline comments and commenting and notifying, and that's what people come back and just get all the evidence, and all the discussion should happen on that page so that later on, when they go to the decision register, so you have this, every decision that your team has made is now, there's a page and it's all outlined. So you can go back and say, well, what have we decided? So if someone's new to the team, and say, well, here's all our decision making to date, which is pretty cool. And then there's a little handy button at the top right that lets you create a new one. So some other tips that I haven't mentioned, if you find yourself deciding things in real time, so you're in a meeting and something comes up, you make a call, and you think it's a big enough call that, one, it might be second guessed, or you might want to just remember why the hell you did it. Basically you can create a DAISY in real time, right? So you create a brand new one, have it decided at the very beginning, lay it out and publish. So that way, at the very least, you can come back to it later, but it maybe turn out that maybe your decision was actually terrible, and you can actually, reverse it. But the biggest point is make sure you close off your decisions. Like indecision is the enemy here. So there's no point just lingering. Sometimes all options are bad. You have to pick the least bad one, but either way, just make a call. So then we'll move on to the last pillar here, which is being a great communicator. So this is writing clearly. This is collaborating well with others and sharing your knowledge, being a strong storyteller. So imagine a world where in the big meeting that you have, everyone is on the same page. Everyone is steeped in the same knowledge. Everyone has a shared understanding of issue. Wouldn't that be great? You're probably not using PowerPoint for that. So the idea here is use pages over presentations. So the irony is not lost that I'm giving you a presentation now, but ignore that. But you find that making these big decisions for your board meeting or for your CEO or whatever it is, that really important information is being conveyed with bullet points. And that's easy for the presenter. You're already steeped in the knowledge. You can just jot off your thoughts, but it makes it hard for the audience. They can't drill down. They can't learn. And often decisions are being made without data. You put some data in there. And often just basically detail is just glossed over in presentations because you have this natural tension, right? You want to include as much data as possible or much information as possible in your pres, but now it's incomprehensible, right? You have a wall of text with 8 million things and graphs no one can read. So to make an effective presentation, you have to strip all that out. But once you strip all that out, then now the detail is lost. So basically, immovable object, irresistible force. I just think like people are using the wrong tool. So the superpower here is Confluence, and it's kind of controversial. Create a page, write everything down in complete sentences, use actual words, link to resources, it's just a page, and present the page, right, rather than the big reveal in the presentation. So this idea was popularized from Amazon. Jeff Bezos famously banned PowerPoint at the executive team level, and we talked about using the 6-page memo. Apparently it started as a 4-page memo, but maybe Amazon grew and it's harder now, so everything's 50% longer. So Google it and you can learn some more on the web about this. But some tips here. So before the big meeting, basically write down your narrative. So think about it as an essay, right? It's like go back to writing in college and say, how can I persuade you or lay out the argument? And you'll find that it helps your thinking. Because while it's easy as a presenter to be able to gloss over that detail, you just can fool yourself. You tell this great story and you just omit all this detail. And relying on your magnetism and charisma in the meeting to get it sold. But you would write it down clinically, you'll find that your thinking gets improved. And this is a page that your team should collaborate on. So, use inline comments and sharing and real-time collaborative editing and all these things. This should be a collaborative effort to get the full team on board. And this is the controversial bit, share it ahead of time. So with presentations, we often have this idea of the big reveal, right? Wow, ta-da, I'm gonna do this. I'm all Steve Jobs up here and at the keynote, and wow. But forget the big reveal. Like, get the questions early, and maybe the meeting can even be omitted because everyone's like, yep, makes sense, off you go. Assuming that doesn't happen and you actually have the big meeting, so you basically start the meeting in silence. You say, hey, everyone, even though you short it ahead of time, they may not have time to read it, and you basically let everyone read the page in silence. They jot down their notes, and you find things really interesting, right? So a question they have on slide 2 that's answered on slide 10, that question never gets asked, right? Because they read the document, they front to back, and they actually see, oh, okay, now I get it, and they scratch out their questions, and what's left are the questions that are actually not answered, right? So then, after everyone's had their chance to read the document, then you say, okay, what are your questions? Right? You don't spend any time belaboring over the points that everybody agrees to. The narrative thread in your presentation where you have this inexorable story that builds on each, and to get to this big reveal, it's like, get rid of all that, right? Because now the team has actually had a chance to digest it, and they're like, okay, yep, that all makes sense, cool, let's get into the hard part of the discussion. So the meeting isn't any longer, even though it starts out with dead silence in the beginning, which can be a little bit awkward, by the way, but you'll get through it. So with that, so not all meetings are big like that. So the regular meetings seemingly are unavoidable, so we better make them awesome. So the situation, we all know about this, useless meetings, nothing is captured, there's no accountability. Meetings are awesome. So your superpower here is Confluence and the meeting notes template. So not super controversial here, but you need to do the due diligence and basically create the meeting notes ahead of your meeting, which includes the people who are going to be in it, mention them, the goals of the meeting, and include your agenda, right? And then in the meeting itself, this is the creative bit, you actually bring up the meeting notes in the meeting that you have. Real-time collab, everyone can be in there directly editing the document as you go and capturing the notes, make sure everything is captured correctly. If it's a remote meeting, if you don't have any materials, you may share the screen so everyone sees the agenda and the discussion happening. And then in the meeting, you capture any action items and any decisions made, and mention those people and assign those tasks so things get done, so you have this accountability. But that's for these one-off meetings. One thing that I really like is recurring meetings. So you have your regular sync with marketing or whatever. Rather than create an individual meeting note for every single one, think about a rolling meeting notes pattern where you basically, not that controversial, but you have a table where each row is a date. Each is a meeting. Each row has its own agenda, and it has any action items and any decisions. And what's awesome about this is you get into your meeting, you can review what happened last time. It's right there, it's scrolled right down, and you can see what actions haven't been done, whether Agnes has done her work. And then at the top of the meeting note, you can insert, in Confluence it's called the task report macro, which will aggregate all open action items that haven't been, like from that current page, that have not been completed, so you can review that at the beginning of each recurring meeting. So simple pattern, but really, really cool and really quite effective. So the tips here, make sure you link your agenda. If you have a recurring meeting and there's no agenda, you should totally cancel the meeting. Everyone, it's awesome. It's a great feeling because guess what? You'll definitely have an agenda next time. And during the meeting, open it on the big screen and use that as your way of capturing, right? So it's more remote friendly, like putting stuff on a whiteboard doesn't help anybody on remote. It doesn't help anybody who couldn't attend the meeting. So you don't have work afterwards. You just do it in the moment. And make sure you mention people so the notifications start flowing. All right, let's move on to the last tip, which is around shipping isn't so easy, and you need a rollout plan. So when you think about a rollout plan, so shipping software is not usually just a feature toggle anymore. It's not just the grand unveiling. You probably have multiple milestones. You have, goes to dog fooding where you use it internally, and then you some subset of customers, and each release you probably have to involve a lot of people. It's not just the devs shipping some code, and people don't know when things go out. So the superpower here is Confluence with a little dash of Jira. And the idea is you outline your plan using Confluence and use the Jira macro. So here's a simplified example. The idea is you break up your release into milestones. So incremental delivery, that's not the exciting bit. But for each milestone, be very clear on what your gating criteria is. So that might just be number of blockers you have. It could be we need to write documentation for support. We need to have the marketing post ready to go. But each milestone, because it's going to maybe different customers, may have different gating criteria. And then for each milestone, you have the approvers. Who are the people that all need to turn their keys simultaneously to make this thing go? So for an internal release for dog fooding, maybe it's just the product manager, the engineer, and the designer say, yep, this is good enough to subject my staff to. Later on, you might need support, you might need marketing to make their call. You can, again, make use of the Jira issue macro where you actually put in Jira tickets into your gating criteria. You can see the example of no blockers. So it says current count 8 issues and 32 issues. So little known fact on the Jira issue macro, any search, you can have it display as a count. So it says, instead of a single issue or a table, you can also have it display as an issue count. So we'll just have a dynamic number, which is 32 issues. So in this case, you have a search for type bug, priority blocker, and that's the gates to launch. So the tips here, really think about your rollout plans and milestones based on blockers. You have to ask yourself this question: would I delay launch for this thing? If the answer is yes, it's a blocker and it's a gating criteria. The answer is no, it's a nice to have. Nice to haves are great, but it's not a blocker, right? It rolls into the next, and a nice to have for milestone 1 may be a blocker for milestone 2, but really think about your rollout plan in terms of blockers. You really need to break up these things into clear milestones that stack. So milestone 2 has everything that milestone 1 has, but try to avoid complex branches and multiple parallel tracks. This should be a living document. Rollout plans, and the one I'm working on is hundreds of revisions of this rollout plan as you learn more, as you add more gating criteria, as you refine your plan and you break things up into smaller increments. And as much as you can, keep your state in one place. So the Jira issue macro is a great tip. Just the work's happening in Jira, so you reference it in Confluence rather than copying and transposing where things get out of date. So with that, the 4 pillars of product management, hope it was helpful. And just a couple plugs for some other talks here at Summit that you might be interested in. James is talking about basically building Jira with Jira. And Sharif is going to go deeper on Confluence on the ultimate guide to Confluence for software teams. So with that, thank you very much. Hope you found this valuable.
Oh. Thank you, Paul.